This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. I thought I'd put together a brief video here to show you how and why the FICA Social Security under the new federal Coronavirus Response Act sometimes shows up as negative, and why it should show up as negative, and why, as it says in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you should make sure to not panic. The specific issue that we're facing here, if you guys can see my screen here, I pulled it up inside of Vista. Sometimes when you have somebody with an earnings code of COVID employee, COVID caretaker, etc., and you have people who are working only there that also have a medical insurance deduction, their liability for the FICA Social Security, here in my case, liability code 501, will show up as an eligible amount of negative and a calculated amount of negative. This is odd for two reasons. One, it doesn't match the FICA Medicare employee, and it doesn't, and this actually is going negative, like the government owes us money back. The question is that correct? And if so, why? So I thought I'd go ahead and explain this using both a whiteboard here and then an Excel document. So first of all, how does this get calculated in a normal employee? Well, I'm going to draw a graph here with two separate paychecks for the same employee. John Smith is our employee of choice here. On this side, we have dollar amounts, and on this side, we have paycheck number one, which is a normal paycheck, and paycheck number two, which is going to be a COVID-19 paycheck. So paycheck number one, he receives $277 in his paycheck. This is his gross pay. And from that, we're going to be taking some deductions. One of the deductions that we take is his medical deduction. And the medical deduction comes out of those wages. And this remaining is the basis for the Social Security, both employee and employer, and that's standard. There's no difference about that. I mean, that's the way we've been running payroll since, as far as I can tell, the IRS passed the newest act in 1984. And it was only this year that this finally changed. However, the interesting thing for the Coronavirus Response Act is that if we have net pay, let's just say that 50% of his wages are regular wages, and then the rest of the week he was out on coronavirus pay, or the COVID-19 pay, and so 50% were the actual wages, normal wages, and 50% were COVID-19 wages. We would take out the medical here from that, and this would become the new basis for the employer Social Security, because under the Act, Social Security wages are not subject to the Social Security taxes. Okay, well, that makes sense. So far, so good. We're okay. But what gets really weird is when we have a situation where the employee, John Smith, say, again, the next week has 100% COVID-19 wages. Now, what happens is this medical forces the basis for the Social Security employer portion here to go negative. The basis goes negative. And the question is that correct? Is it correct for the basis for the Social Security employer to go negative? And the answer is yes, it is. It is correct. And the reason it's correct is the way that we apportion this medical over time. The question is, how does this get apportioned over time? How does this get spread out? Does it get spread out dollar per hour? Does it get spread out a flat amount per week or pay period, how does that get apportioned over time? And that's critical to answering the question, is this correct? And in 98% of the cases, it is correct for the basis to go negative. I'll show this to you in a Excel spreadsheet. And by the way, I will be sharing the spreadsheet with this video so that you guys can have this afterward. So here is an example, and I'm going to go ahead and say explain this spreadsheet to you guys so that you can see what we're doing. Here we have John Smith again. His yearly wages. He's a salary worker. He gets paid $108,000. Let me make this a little bit bigger. $108,000. That's his normal earnings. That means that in a calendar quarter, he gets paid $27,000. That simply is 108 divided by 4, which means that in a typical pay period, he gets paid $2,077, right? You can see here that in a calendar quarter, 13 pay periods, that he gets paid, if we sum that, $27,000, which matches up to our earnings in a normal week. So if he was to be paid normal wages all quarter long, he would be paid $22,077. He would have an employee medical deduction. You can see here. He would also have employee tax of $120, employer Medicare tax of $28, federal withholding. I put him at 20% of $388, which would give him his net pay here of $1,402. That's all normal stuff. That's the stuff we've been doing since 1984. And of course, the employer has their own portion. We have the employer medical liability, 138. We have the employer social security tax, 120. Employer Medicare of 28. Plus, you have other things, workers' comp, etc., but they don't pertain to what we have to talk about today. So all this to say that if we were to do a normal week's pay run for John Smith at $2,077, that he would get $1,402, and we would do a federal tax deposit of our employee social security, employer tax, employer Medicare, employee and employer, plus a federal withholding, $684. Okay, all's well so far. Now, here's the deal. The law has stipulated forever and a day that this 7,200 right here, this is the one that causes all of the pain. The employee medical deduction is not subject to Social Security wages. Specifically, it's not a basis for either the medical Social Security wages, nor is it for the employer Social Security wages. Employee and employer both, it reduces the basis for both of those. And you can see that here. When the formula that I have here adds up their wages, subtracts out the medical deduction on a weekly basis, $138. That means that the eligible wages for Social Security for an employee drops by $138, 2077 minus 138, etc. Right? And that would be true on a yearly basis as well, 108, or on a quarterly basis, that you can see that it's just 25,200, 27 minus 108, 1,800. Now, that's also true on the Social Security employer side. It also drops the basis there. So how does this play if you have COVID earnings? So for weeks 3 and 4 here, we're going to pretend that John Smith did not receive regular wages, regular earnings, but received COVID earnings instead. So he's still getting paid the same overall for the calendar quarter. You can see here my sum is $27,000 between these two earnings, regular earnings, COVID earnings. So in a quarter, he's still receiving the same as normal. However, this employee medical deduction, the part that's not subject to employee or employer wages, is spread out over this calendar quarter. Therefore, we have to include this deduction in the weeks where he's only getting COVID wages. Otherwise, we wouldn't be getting the full benefit of this 7,200. Now, how does this play out? Well, for the employee eligible wages on the Social Security side, nothing changes, right? Because COVID wages are subject to employee Social Security. So he still has $1,938, still has Social Security employee tax of $120. But here's where it gets weird. the Social Security employer eligible wages. Now this has gone negative by 138. Specifically, it's gone negative by the amount of the employee medical deduction because there are no subject wages. There are no wages subject to employer Social Security, and yet we must take the deduction of $7,200. And you can see here that when I've summed the 13 weeks with the negative here, so this sum, and you can play with this Excel spreadsheet afterwards, you watch this video, this sum sums all of this, that the difference between these two, the quarterly and the one with the COVID wages, the normal quarterly and the COVID wages, is exactly the same as the COVID wages up here, which means that on a calendar quarter basis, which is how we report our 941 taxes, that our 941 subject Social Security wages has been reduced by the full amount of the COVID wages and nothing more. Now, what if you say, well, it's not subject, we can't reduce it below zero? And we just said, no, that's not right. We're going to call this zero. We're just going to override it, right? And we can do that. It's really easy to override things. We just click on that, we click zero, we're done. What would that actually do? Well, the problem with that is if we were to reduce this to zero, now we've actually reduced the difference. The sum of all of these things is too much. Now the difference between what normally would be happening in the calendar quarter, 25,200, and what we've now done on our subject wages, 21,323, is not the same as our COVID-19 wages. And since it is not the same, we have not taken the full benefit, and we're going to confuse ourselves quite royally when we go to file our 941 taxes at the end of the quarter, or 941 report at the end of the quarter, and we're going to have a tough time substantiating this in case of an audit. Therefore, the correct thing to do is to allow this to go negative on the eligible and the tax itself, and to take the federal tax deposit and reduce your federal tax deposit, in this case by $9. It will still net out, of course, you still owe money, but you reduce the federal tax deposit by $9 and remit that to the government. Of course, you can then take your federal tax credit, which is your wages, employer medical liability, and your Medicare. I hope that explains why we would allow the employer tax to occasionally go negative, and feel free and send me an email or give us a call if you have any questions. All right, thank you, and we will be talking to you later.